Hey everyone, it's me Daniela from Sewing for a Living, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to replace the elastic on a swimsuit with a self-tie waist bottom. So here I have my daughter's two-piece swimsuit from last year that still fits, but the elastic has gone completely stretched and the bottom piece is moving around as she wears it. Surprisingly, the top has its elastic in shape, so I'm not going to mess with it at this point. The reason for that might be that there is a binding attached over the elastic, but in any case the elastic is still functioning and that's why I'm going to work only on the bottom. I like to use cotton elastic like this one. It's knitted and the structure it has makes it much more durable and resistant. It will hold on better over time than rubber elastic. For this project I'm going to use 1/4 inch or 7 mm wide knit elastic, as this is the width used by the manufacturer. I'll link to the type of elastic I use in the description below. The width of the elastic is appropriate for the seam allowance, so I'm going to keep it consistent. What's specific about this bottom is that it has 4 ties on the sides and the legs are not in a continuous circular shape. I need to remove them first in order to be able to start working on the legs and waist from the beginning. To do that, I'm going to look for the openings left for turning the ties inside out. Very often on swimwear, they are left unclosed as the swim fabric doesn't unravel. To remove the tie, I'm going to turn it inside out and get to the seam. Then I'm going to unpick the seam and the tie will fall off. It's a serger seam and I have a video on how to easily remove serger stitches. If you're interested, I'm going to link to it in the description below. This tie is off now and I'm going to continue with the other 3. Now that the ties are out of the way, I'm going to start unpicking the zigzag top stitching. For me, this is the most unpleasant part. I do have some tricks on unpicking serger and cover stitch seams, which I'll link to below, but I'm helpless with the zigzag, so if you know any tricks for it, please share in the comments. As you can see, pieces of the rubber elastic started to fall off. It's so damaged that it falls in small, rigid pieces. Sometimes the rubber gets melted inside of the swimsuit and it's hard to remove. You can see now why I prefer the knit elastic, as it can also get stretched over time, but never to this degree and after such a short period of time. In all cases, you need to fully remove all pieces of old rubber elastic so it doesn't stay in the way and make it hard to attach the new one. In industrial sewing, it's very common to use rubber elastic in swimwear. The reason is that rubber elastic doesn't hold up to water that much, but at the same time it's not very resistant to water and salt exposure and gets destroyed in a relatively short period of time. Once I'm done with the top stitching, I'm going to remove the serger seams that hold the elastic on all 4 sides. I'm going to replace it with the new one. In most cases, I would use a serger to attach the elastic. I would also use a walking foot or at least a knit foot to make it easier to feed the slippery swim fabric through the sewing machine. But in this video, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use only my very basic regular sewing machine with the regular sewing foot. This bottom has the front lined. The lining can be on the whole bottom, partially on the front, or all over the front as it's here. In any case, you might want to stitch the lining to the fashion fabric first, so that they act like one fabric before you attach the elastic. I'm going to use a white zigzag stitch and sew at the edge of both fabrics. This will serve as a basting stitch, although you won't need to remove it at the end. Just make sure you sew close to the edge so that this seam is not visible on the face side later when you start top stitching the elastic. The next step is to measure how much elastic I'm going to need for every section. If this was a new swimsuit, the length of the elastic is usually given in the sewing instructions. But since this is not the case, we have to figure out the length of the elastic ourselves. The elastic needs to be shorter than the section I'm going to attach it to, and that's how it's going to create some gathering. So, how much elastic? For the legs of the bottom, I would need the elastic approximately 2 inches or 5 centimeters shorter than the leg. I'm going to cut it 1 inch shorter than the leg, and I'm going to show where the other inch goes in a minute. But first I'm going to cut the elastic for the second leg as long as the first one, so that they create equal gathering on both sides. The other inch I'm going to leave at the beginning. I call this a tail. I like to leave a tail because if I start attaching the elastic from the beginning of the fabric, especially on the regular sewing machine, the fabric gets over just half of the feeding dogs, and more often than not it gets eaten by the machine. The elastic and the slippery swim fabric underneath are not transported forward easily if you start from the beginning, and that can be really frustrating. And if you don't start sewing the elastic from the beginning, you're going to have another functional and aesthetic problem, so this is the solution I came up with. I'm leaving that 1 inch tail and aligning the elastic to the fabric. Then, still using the white zigzag seam, I'm gonna start sewing without pulling anything. I'm going to make the beginning of the seam and lock it. Once the elastic is secured, I'm going to pull it so that it matches the length of the leg. For a good gathering, it's very important to pull only the elastic and not the fabric itself. Then I'm going to hold it in the middle so that I work on a smaller section and the elastic is still stretched. In the beginning, you can hold onto the tail and slightly pull so that you help the fabric feed through the machine. This is how it looks by now. I'm going to repeat with the other leg. Again, stretch the elastic to match the fabric and sew it by constantly adjusting to match the edge of the leg curve. Next, I have to attach the elastic to the waist. Here I'm not going to pre-cut the elastic. The front waist is really short here, so I'm going to stretch the elastic as I go. Again, I'm starting with an elastic tail and making the first couple of stitches without pulling. Then I'm going to start pulling the elastic as I go, not too much and not too little, just enough to gather the fabric. and I'm going to repeat with the back waist. At the end, the waist should look as gathered as the legs. Here's what mine looks like by now. What's left to do is the top stitching. I want to stay consistent with the look of the top, so I'm going to use a more narrow zigzag seam and the same light purple thread. To top stitch, fold the fabric over the elastic tightly. Insert it into the machine. I'm still using the elastic tails as an assistance to help me fit the swim fabric. I'm going to pull the elastic so it matches the fabric as I go, and I'm going to sew over the inner side of the elastic. This way the elastic will be nicely covered and not going to show on the inside. Keep pulling the elastic stretched so it matches the fabric. This way you are not going to have wrinkles of fabric and popping threads. So here is one side done. I'm going to continue with the other three. Once all four sides are done, I'm going to remove the elastic tails and clean the threads. The last step here would be to attach the ties at the sides. To do that, I'm going to turn the tie inside out so that I sew on the wrong side of the fabric. I am going to insert the swimsuit bottom side in the tie opening. I want the seams on the ties and the holes to stay on the inside, so I'm going to put the tie seams at the center and toward the inside of the bottom. I'm going to adjust so that the side of the bottom lies nicely into the string and doesn't fold or twist. I'm going to sew them together with 3/8 of an inch or 1 cm seam allowance. I'm making a couple of locking stitches from beginning to end to make sure that the seam will survive the pulling of the tie. I'm going to turn the tie outside in, and this is how it looks when done. Pretty much what we are aiming for, and the hole stays on the inside as we intended to make it less visible. And then I'm going to repeat with the other 3 ties. Again, aligning the seam of the tie at the center of the wrong side of the bottom. So here is our swimsuit. It looks pretty much the same as in the beginning, but now the elastic is going to do its job and my daughter is going to wear it for much longer, or at least until it fits. When sewing with swim fabric, make sure to use an appropriate knit needle and possibly a knit foot, or even better, a walking foot to make it easier on yourself. Sometimes the feet come with the machine, sometimes you need to buy them in addition. Mine are bought in addition and they came in this box. If you would like to watch a video on how and when to use different sewing feet, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more sewing and DIY how-tos, and I'll see you next time. Bye!